The first signs were so subtle that no one noticed. A strange weed appeared in backyards, parks, even cracks in the sidewalks. It was dark green, almost black, with curling tendrils and delicate, thorned vines. People assumed it was just an invasive species, something that had been brought over from distant lands. It spread quickly, coiling around fences, creeping over walls, and taking root in every patch of earth it could find. Weeks passed, and the plant began to bloom. The flowers were striking, a deep, unnatural red, with a faint glow that made them seem almost alive in the darkness. They emitted a strange fragrance, sweet but heavy, clinging to the air. People couldn't help but stop and inhale, lured by the scent's allure. Soon, small clusters of people were seen standing by these flowers, gazing at them in a trance, their faces peaceful, their expressions vacant. Within days, those who lingered too long near the flowers began to change. At first, it was subtle. Some people woke with strange, greenish veins winding beneath their skin. Others found patches of their flesh rough and scaly, almost like bark. Doctors were baffled, diagnosing it as some kind of fungal infection or allergic reaction, but no treatment seemed to work. Those affected grew worse, their skin hardening, their veins darkening until they looked like roots twisting under the surface. News reports began circulating about people disappearing in broad daylight, vanishing from parks, gardens, and fields. Then one evening, a witness reported seeing something strange, a figure, rigid and still, half hidden in a grove of trees. When they approached, they saw that the figure was covered in bark-like skin, motionless, arms outstretched as if reaching for the sky. It was human, or had been. Its eyes were open, but cloudy, staring blankly as a thin layer of moss crept over its face, sealing it in green. Panic began to spread. People tried to cut down the flowers, burning patches of them, but it was useless. The more they fought, the faster the plants grew. The dark weeds thrived in fire, spreading their seeds on the wind as they burned. New vines appeared overnight, crawling over concrete, sneaking into homes, even winding their way up through the cracks in basement floors. Those who inhaled the flower's pollen became infected, unable to resist the call of the plants. Within weeks, the first plant zombies emerged. They wandered aimlessly, their skin covered in bark, their eyes milky white, their movements slow and deliberate. They moved in silence, drawn to places where the strange flowers grew. There, they would stop, standing still among the blooms, faces upturned toward the sky, as if absorbing something from the air. And in time, the roots took over, wrapping around their bodies until they could no longer move, merging them with the soil and transforming them into part of the landscape. These unfortunate souls dotted the countryside, silent, frozen figures draped in moss, with vines entwined around their limbs. It became a nightmare landscape, the hills and valleys filled with what looked like trees, but, upon closer inspection, revealed the horrified, petrified faces of the victims, their final moments of terror preserved in wood and moss. As time passed, more people fell under the influence of the plant, even those who tried to avoid the flowers entirely. The spores floated invisibly through the air, infecting entire cities. People who had been indoors for weeks began to find themselves slipping into strange trances, feeling the urge to step outside, to walk barefoot on the grass, to touch the trees. They couldn't resist the compulsion. Families awoke in the night to find one of their own gone, their bed empty, the window left open to the silent, waiting dark. Soon, scientists tried to analyze the plant, but every attempt at research ended in disaster. Laboratories became overgrown with vines overnight, their equipment overrun, their researchers vanishing or succumbing to the plant's pull. Those who weren't taken outright began to change, their bodies adapting to the invasive nature of the plant, their minds clouded until they no longer remembered why they had come in the first place. They, too, wandered out into the fields, joining the others among the flowers. Society unraveled as fear and mistrust spread. People barricaded themselves indoors, sealing their windows and doors against the outside. But it was useless. The plants seemed to have a mind of their own. Vines slipped under doors, pried open windows, and tore through walls, as if seeking out any sign of life. And the people inside, no matter how hard they fought, found themselves overcome by an urge they could not resist, the compulsion to open the door, to step out, to welcome the darkness of the vines. Days passed, then weeks, and entire towns lay silent and still. The only sounds were the creaking of branches, the rustle of leaves, and the occasional crackling as a body turned to bark, frozen forever in place. Cities became overgrown, skyscrapers entangled in vines, windows shattered by creeping roots that overtook desks, hallways, and offices. The plants found ways to grow through concrete, metal, glass, consuming every inch of civilization as if it had never existed. Eventually, only a few scattered survivors remained. They lived in constant fear, moving from place to place, never staying in one area too long, hiding from the silent figures that lurked in the shadows. At night, they would sometimes see the plant zombies gathering under the moonlight, their bodies twisted and transformed, their faces hollow and unrecognizable. They moved as one, a mindless congregation drawn by the plant's will, an unholy garden growing in places that had once been filled with laughter and life. As the months wore on, the few who remained began to change. Their nails grew thicker, dark, and sharp like thorns. Their skin began to itch and split, revealing green tendrils beneath the surface, and when they touched the soil, they felt something pulling them down, an invisible force that called them to join the others. They knew that it was only a matter of time. Eventually, they gave in. They walked out into the overgrown streets, stepping barefoot into the soil, feeling the cool earth welcoming them, the vines coiling around their ankles, pulling them gently downward. They felt their minds slip into silence, a strange peace overtaking them as the plant finally claimed them. The world grew quiet. Every street, every field, every town became a forest of silent watchers, human forms draped in moss, covered in bark, frozen among the blood-red blooms. The flowers glowed softly in the moonlight, their light casting an eerie glow over the new wilderness. And somewhere, in the stillness of this silent world, the plants continued to grow, creeping and twisting, eternally patient, eternally consuming. In time, all memory of what once had been vanished, lost to a world where the only sound was the rustling of leaves, the creak of bark, and the quiet, insidious growth of the endless, unrelenting green.